You know how things in the Middle East can get really tense, like you can practically feel it sometimes?
Oh, absolutely. It's definitely a region to watch closely.
Well, with the current situation sort of brewing between Iran and Egypt, that tension is definitely palpable right now.
Mhm.
And right in the middle of this comes something pretty fascinating. The China-Egypt Eagle of Civilizations 2025 Joint Air Force Training Exercise.
Right. That specific exercise.
Yeah. And that's going to be our focus for this deep dive. We're going to try and dig into what this exercise really signifies, look at the hardware involved, and maybe unpack the bigger geopolitical picture.
Sounds good. There's a lot there.
Hopefully, by the time we're done, you listening will have a much clearer sense of the shifting dynamics over there and, well, what these displays of capability are all about.
Well, what immediately grabs your attention here is um, the timing, definitely, but also the specific hardware China has decided to bring.
Okay.
The debut of China's Y-20 large aerial refueling aircraft in Egypt for this exercise. That's a really significant move.
First time for that plane in Egypt, right? For a drill.
Exactly. First time in the country for an exercise like this. And it's not alone. They've also brought J-10C and J-10S fighter jets and the KJ-500 airborne early warning aircraft.
The AEW&C plane, okay.
Yeah. And on the Egyptian side, they're contributing their MiG-29 fighters.
Okay, so the Y-20, you mentioned that specifically. That's not just like a standard cargo plane, is it? I remember reading it's China's own design, independently developed.
That's it precisely. It's their large military transport, and crucially, they hold all the intellectual property rights.
Which is a pretty major achievement in aerospace.
It absolutely is, and it really highlights something important about aviation manufacturing. Building these large military transport aircraft, it's actually a much tougher engineering challenge than, say, civilian airliners.
Why is that? Just the demands.
Yeah, the operating conditions are incredibly demanding. Just think about it. Airbus, right? A giant in civilian jets like the A350, the A380. But their military transport side, it's focused on turboprops, not the big turbofan jets like the Y-20.
Ah, okay.
As it stands, only, 3 countries globally, China, the U.S., and Russia can actually manufacture these turbofan large military transports.
So that really puts China in a pretty exclusive club.
It certainly does.
So showing off the Y-20 in Egypt feels like, it feels like a very deliberate statement about how far China's come in aviation tech.
I think so. And like you said, it's not happening in a vacuum, is it? The whole situation with Boeing recently adds another layer here.
Right. The suspension of deliveries, how does that fit in?
Exactly. If we zoom out just a bit, China deciding recently to suspend receiving Boeing aircraft parts equipment. That provides some really important context because it's happening just as China's own aviation industry is making some pretty serious leaps. We saw that huge breakthrough with the C919 airliner's engine, didn't we? The Changjiang 1000.
Yeah, the announcement that it performed far beyond expectations in testing.
Right. The China Aviation Engine Group said that. And that success, well, it really underlines the growing strength and, I guess, self-reliance of China's supply chain in this area.
Plus, they've been strong in avionics for a while now.
Exactly. They have that foundation.
So it feels like all these different pieces, the engine, the avionics, the airframe tech, like the Y-20, they're all kind of coming together, maybe paving the way for like the C929 wide-body jet.
That seems to be the trajectory, a clear goal towards more self-sufficiency in a really vital industry. And, that recent story about them successfully repairing a cracked keel beam on a Boeing plane.
SF Airlines, yeah, I saw that.
That wasn't about them suddenly gaining the ability to do it. It was more that previous contracts maybe limited them from doing that kind of heavy maintenance.
Ah, okay. So the capability was likely there, just maybe not applied before.
Precisely. It shows that even if, hypothetically, they face more market isolation, China has the technical depth in the manufacturing know-how to keep its existing fleet, including Western planes, flying.
Which brings us neatly to the economic side of things, because that feels really central to the whole picture, doesn't it?
Absolutely critical.
We're talking about the business model of a lot of these big Western tech companies, heavily reliant on those after-sales services, right? Maintenance, upgrades, the recurring revenue.
The technical service fees, yeah. Boeing was mentioned as a prime example, obviously. With such a huge global fleet, military and civilian, it's like a built-in revenue stream, almost a quasi-monopoly for cash flow through these fees.
It's like a subscription for hardware, almost.
Kind of.
Yeah.
And they even use these predictable fees sometimes in financial derivatives trading. It's part of that whole WI alliance model, continuous upgrades of profit.
Okay, so using service fees, which are already sort of virtual for financial trading.
Yeah.
And that's like,
Well, the source material called it compounding virtuality.
mhm.
It reflects a big part of how the U.S. economy, or parts of it, function right now.
But the key point is you can't have that service revenue forever without the manufacturing base, right? No products, eventually no services needed.
Exactly. It's fundamentally linked. Which brings us right back to China's suspension of Boeing deliveries.
So it's not just about hitting Boeing's bottom line directly.
It seems more strategic than that, maybe aimed at highlighting the decline or perceived decline of U.S. manufacturing and potentially disrupting that service sector, and maybe even the financial stability linked to it through those derivatives.
Wow. So it's a kind of multi-pronged economic pressure.
It looks that way. And we've seen similar ripples before, haven't we?
Yeah.
In sectors like U.S. agriculture during the tariff disputes.
Yeah, definitely. And wasn't there something about Elon Musk initially being quiet on tariffs, then changing his tune?
Right. The shift apparently came after China's countermeasures started affecting financial markets, maybe impacting Tesla's valuation. It underlines how interconnected these things are. Remember that quote from the Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson about being ready to fight as long as needed?
Yeah, in the context of the tariff situation, it showed real resolve.
Definitely underscored their determination in that economic contest.
Okay, so against this backdrop, this economic maneuvering, we start seeing some interesting shifts in U.S. geopolitical strategy mentioned. The source talks about the Trump administration's changing face on tariffs, maybe hinting at a deal, but also adding things like port fees.
Yeah, it's like offering a carrot, maybe no further tariff hikes, but still wielding a stick with these new fees. The goal mentioned was potentially reaching some kind of deal with China within weeks.
And this is all happening while there's media speculation about, well, about Elon Musk and Pentagon briefings on China war plans,
Yeah.
but also the administration wanting Musk to keep his access to China. That sounds complicated.
Very. It suggests maybe a potential pivot or consideration of pivoting from escalating in non-traditional areas like trade towards more traditional security concerns.
So military dimensions.
Potentially.
Yeah.
That's why the analysis suggests keeping a close eye on military exercises, say, in the Yellow Sea and Bohai Sea, and any hints about new strategic weapons systems, either development or deployment.
It even floats the idea of the U.S. maybe considering a strategy a bit like Russia's, compensating for perceived gaps in conventional strength by highlighting nuclear capabilities.
Right. Perhaps through announcements about next-gen strategic nukes. That would obviously be a major rhetorical escalation, raising the stakes considerably.
Definitely raises questions about the level of strategic risk being contemplated. And meanwhile, we are seeing more U.S. military activity in the Western Pacific.
We are. Those U.S.-South Korea exercises with the B-1B bombers, the continued friction in the South China Sea involving the Philippines, the USS Nimitz deployment, it's all part of that picture.
And China's leader visiting Vietnam, Malaysia, Cambodia around the same time. Could that be signaling? Maybe prior notification about how they might respond?
It could certainly be interpreted that way. Communication and signaling regarding potential responses, especially concerning the Philippines situation.
Okay, and then we pivot back to the Middle East again. The analysis frames it as another potential arena for what it calls extreme strategic blackmail.
Yeah, and the driver seems to be those perceived risks or concerns in the Western Pacific.
It mentions this blackmail is both outward and inward facing. What exactly does that mean here?
It suggests the administration might consider actions, say, in the Persian Gulf, that could even negatively impact U.S. interests as a way to exert pressure more broadly to achieve its goals elsewhere. Almost like, if we face risks over there, everyone shares the pain over here.
Okay, that's quite a stance.
And that brings us back full circle to the PLA's forces, described as vanguard forces, participating in this joint exercise in Egypt.
Right, Egypt being key in the Middle East and Africa.
Right.
A central plains is the analogy used.
Exactly. A strategically vital location to show presence, build interoperability, and gain familiarity.
So even if it's just familiarization at this stage, the exercise itself sends a strong signal.
For sure. Those pushing for a greater Israel, like Netanyahu's group and the U.S. itself, given its long-standing focus on the Middle East, they have to be taking notice.
Plus, Egypt's own history. The Sinai occupation by Israel, their current fears about refugees being used as a pretext, that adds layers of local concern, too.
Absolutely. And it makes you ask some key questions about the exercise itself. Like, will any of that heavy Chinese gear stay in Egypt afterwards? What role are advanced systems, like radar, playing.
Because even export versions of Chinese tech could change the local balance.
It could certainly give U.S. and Israeli forces something new to think about, especially given Egypt's historical issues with Israel. It could act as a deterrent.
Okay, let's shift focus eastward again to Russia. How are they viewing all this? The analysis suggests they're watching the U.S. tactics, especially this extreme strategic blackmail idea, with keen interest.
Yeah, it's like they're observing a high-stakes game and looking for opportunities.
And the potential game for them is instability in the Gulf.
Potentially.
Right.
If the Persian Gulf gets seriously destabilized, think about who benefits from increased reliance on alternative energy sources. Both China and the EU might need more Russian oil and gas.
Ah, the energy angle. There's historical context there too, right? Soviet-U.S. energy discussions.
Exactly. So, Russia seems to be playing this complex game described as shifting allegiances, trying to improve ties with everyone, maybe playing China and the U.S. off each other a bit to maximize Russia's own benefit.
Sounds like a bit of a gambler's mentality, perhaps. Viewing past losses as just the entry fee for current opportunities.
That's one way to put it. The analysis uses the term gambler's psychology. They might anticipate getting more leverage, especially over Chinese energy imports, if Gulf supplies are disrupted. Remember Putin complaining about gas price negotiations with China before?
I do, yeah.
So disruption could strengthen their hand, maybe in other sectors too, like rare earths or aluminum.
And this fits into their broader strategy, using China to counterbalance the West.
It aligns with what's been termed Russia's Afghanistan strategy, seeing China as a vital counterweight, especially in traditional security. Their somewhat reserved response to U.S. overtures on South Asia seems to fit this pattern of careful balancing.
So, while Russia's clearly looking out for number one,
Opportunistic, perhaps?
China can probably tolerate that as long as Russia doesn't, say, join some kind of anti-China tariff group.
That seems to be the calculation. The U.S. strategy of alliances and confrontations might have put some strain on Sino-Russian trust, sure, but maybe it also inadvertently pushed the EU a bit closer to China, at least in resisting U.S. tariffs. An unintended consequence.
So as we try to connect all these dots, the military moves, the economic pressures, the shifting alliances, it really drives home the value of one crucial underlying resource: time.
Precisely. In today's international power games, time itself has become one of the most critical strategic resources. It's intangible, you can't fully control it, but it's absolutely vital.
Okay, so let's try and pull this all together. This deep dive into the China-Egypt Eagle of Civilizations exercise, it's clearly much more than just a standard military drill.
Oh, definitely.
It's a pretty potent demonstration of China's expanding military tech and capabilities. It's a marker, really, of the shifting power dynamics in the Middle East. And it's a key piece in this much larger global competition puzzle.
We've touched on China using economic leverage strategically and how other major players like Russia are positioning themselves very carefully in response to U.S. policies.
So it leaves you with a pretty significant question to ponder, doesn't it? Thinking about these rapid tech advancements we've discussed, the ones showcased in this exercise, and this incredibly complex web of global relationships.
Yeah.
How might these seemingly localized events, like one joint military exercise in Egypt, actually foreshadow much bigger shifts in global security and economic power just down the road?
And what are the long-term implications of using time itself as a strategic tool in this constantly changing global landscape?
Yeah.
Something to really think about.